go ahead and open up your chat box if you haven't already opened it, and your Q&A box, because this is going to be a great discussion. I'm so happy to have invited some people to talk a little bit about sports, which is always something fun that people like to talk about. People might have a lot of questions about, people might just be curious. And so we're going to be talking about all sorts of things like that. But I want to know what your questions are, because the audience is going to be diverse. Some of you are big sports fans. Some of you are just curious about it. Some of you are probably captains and athletes on your teams, while others are like, I just like it as a hobby. So I would love for you, if you have a specific question about sports, to go ahead and start asking in the Q&A box, and that way we have a sense of what you want to talk about, and we'll make sure we fold it into the conversation. So I think we're live streaming where we need to be streaming. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody again to Tuesday Talks. And we, before we dive in, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that you all can see my screen. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure that you all are where you need to be. There is a chance, those of you who've joined Tuesday Talks before know this game, but if it's your first time joining Tuesday Talks, we do play a game sometimes on Tuesday Talks called Spot Mr. View. So make sure you have all of our pictures open, our windows of our faces, because at any point, Mr. View may pop in. And if he pops in, you want to take a screenshot and send an email to contact@initialview.com, and you will win a prize. So make sure you are ready with your screenshot savvy skills, because sometimes he's here for just a second. Sometimes he'll kind of hang out for a bit. So just keep aware. And then we just want to say a big thank you to our sponsor schools, once again, for joining us. And if you need Chinese support, then please do scan this QR code. We do have a live stream Chinese platform, so you can get some translation there as well. And then on YouTube, and I'm not sure this link is going to work today because I was having trouble with it. So go ahead and just go to our YouTube channel, YouTube at Initial View, and you will see the YouTube live stream. And I do have someone there translating in Korean today. All right. So before we start this chat question, I'm going to go ahead and have my guests introduce themselves. So Jessica, can you start us off?
Sure. Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Jessica Johnston. I'm Associate Dean of Admission and Coordinator of International Admission at Occidental College in Los Angeles, California, which is a Division III school for varsity athletes. About a quarter of our students are varsity athletes, and another 15% or so are involved in intramural and club sports as well.
Wonderful. Welcome, Jessica. And Michelle.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle Fokum. I'm an admission counselor at Rice University, and that is in Houston, Texas. So just a little bit about Houston. That is next to the medical center. We have the Energy Corridor, which is about 20 minutes away, and lots of amazing things to do in Houston. In terms of athletics, we have about less than 10% of our student body are in varsity athletics, so that is D1 athletics at Rice University. And we do have other sports for students who are not varsity, and we will be talking about that later. So that includes club and also intramural sports.
Fantastic. And Lisa.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Rainey. I'm the Director of International Admissions here at Syracuse University in Syracuse, New York. Like my colleague from Rice University, Syracuse has NCAA Division I athletics. So that's the highest level of university athletics in the United States. So very competitive. It's a small percentage of our students who play Division I sports, so at that varsity level, but over half of our students play club or intramural recreational teams. So there, I know we already had a question in the Q&A about that. There are a lot of ways to play sports at university beyond just those Division I super competitive teams. So we're excited to talk to all of you today about all of those different options that you'll have.
And finally, Clara.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Clara Hoff. I'm a Senior Assistant Dean at the University of Virginia, located here in Charlottesville, Virginia. UVA also has Division I athletics for men's and women's sports, as well as intramural and club sports, which have different degrees of competitiveness as well.
Wonderful. So I have a couple polls here. The first one I'm going to launch right now is just where I'm curious where people in our audience are in terms of applying in the application process. And so go ahead and answer the question. I'm seeing the results come in, and it looks like many of you are getting ready to apply soon, as in like now. So that's great. That's fantastic. We have a couple of few younger students as well, and some counselors here. Welcome everybody to this talk. That's awesome. And while you're finishing up that poll, I have one more question for you all. And that is, we're going to finish up this poll in a second here. If you didn't answer the question, you still have like 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Awesome. Mostly people who are applying to college right away. My next poll is going to be, what kind of athlete are you? So go ahead and take a look at this question and go ahead and answer what you think, and it's multiple choice, so you can pick more than one. And while we're waiting for those results in, I'm going to actually ask my admissions officer. They didn't know that I was going to do this. What kind of athlete are you? So, Jessica, how would you describe yourself as an athlete?
Poor. I'm an enthusiastic swimmer.
Okay, great. Awesome. That's a good way to describe it. And Clara, how about you?
I love watching sports, especially at the collegiate level, and I like a few sports as a hobby.
Great. And Lisa?
I'm not athletic at all. I'm much more of a bookworm myself, but when I do have a little free time, I do love to ride my bike and do yoga. So I'm not much of a team player, I guess. I like those sort of solo activities, but I do like to see our men's and women's soccer teams play here at Syracuse.
Awesome. And Michelle, what about you?
So I was a student athlete at Rice University, and now I'm currently a professional athlete. The sport I play is track and field. I'm a triple and long jumper who currently, I did compete for the United States.
Woohoo! That's amazing. What's the distance that you jump? Like, what's your?
So in the long jump, I jumped 22 feet, which is 6.75 meters. And in the triple jump, I jumped 14.04 meters, which is like 46 feet, 1 inch-ish.
Amazing, amazing. Well, we're so happy that you are here. And I hope that it makes people on this call feel good because we have a full range. I mean, and we're going to talk about kind of that full range where some of you might be, yes, I need to know what the requirements are for NCAA. And some of you are like, is there something for me where I kind of like playing ultimate frisbee, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do to like find people who want to play with me. So from the poll, it does look like it's a whole mix of people here. And I'm going to go ahead and share those results so you can see them. Some of you love playing sports, and some of you love watching sports, and some of you are just curious and like these schools. So that's the perfect audience for us today, and we're so happy you're here. All right, so back to my screen real quick. I think you all saw this question, but go ahead and in the chat, what do you think of when you hear the word athletics? Go ahead and type in the chat. I know it's always like a little bit like in the beginning of a call, it's hard to get involved. So, but what do you think of when you hear the word athletics? Or what do you think of when you hear the word sports? I saw somebody already in the Q&A say that they're a cyclist. I mean, athletics can be anything, like a lot of things. So any thoughts on what you think athletics, what do you think of when you hear the word athletics? And maybe I'll broaden that question a little. What do you think of when you hear the word athletics and admissions? Like, just kind of to be a little bit more contextual. And maybe people are like, I don't know what to ask. So competitive. Okay, great. That's a good word. Strong. dedicated, a person who is good at the sport. All right, those are great things to be thinking about. So I want us to get just started and talk a little bit about athletics as a culture and like as a US cultural thing. And then also maybe you all can share a little bit of like campus wise what athletics means culturally, and then we can talk a little bit more about some details. So we'll just go in the order of the picture. So Syracuse, Lisa, do you want to start off and talk a little bit about what your picture is and also what?
Absolutely. Thank you. So this photo is inside what was formerly, as you might be familiar, formerly known as the Carrier Dome, which is the big athletics facility that's located right on Syracuse University's campus. It's recently been rebranded to the JMA Wireless Dome, so we're adjusting to that new name. But the important thing is it's right on campus. It's where our men's and women's basketball teams play, our football team, American football team plays, and it will hold, in this particular photo, this was record-setting attendance at just under 34,000 people at a college basketball game a couple of years ago, of course, prior to the pandemic. But it really is, not every student at Syracuse is an athlete, but many of them are sports fans. They like the school spirit. When you think about campus culture, we think about things like school spirit and that enthusiasm for being part of something maybe bigger than yourself. I think it's also great to note that we're New York's college team. So in New York State, this is really the biggest profile collegiate athletics teams that you're going to find. So there's support from the community, from alumni, from people all across the state who come to Syracuse and support our teams as well as watch from home. But it's a great source of energy and enthusiasm, school spirit, pride for our athletes, but certainly for our students who come to Syracuse as well.
Awesome. Okay, and then Clara.
Hello, everyone. Like I mentioned earlier, the University of Virginia has Division I athletics teams. You'll see here in this photo the national championship for basketball a few years ago, which was very exciting for all of us. We also have some more recent national championships, including women's swimming and diving and men's tennis. So UVA is really strong across many different teams. But what stands out to me as more of a spectator is the community aspect of athletics and that togetherness that you get within the student body. You hear current students talking about different sports and games that are happening, but you also hear alumni talking about it as a big part of their UVA experience. So even if you're not someone who has a ton of experience in sports, these games are all open to students and can be a big part of student life here.
Wonderful. And Jessica.
Yeah, so like I said, Oxy is Division III, so we're kind of the outlier here. But it's interesting too that we also have a pretty significant proportion of our student body is made up of varsity athletes. And part of that is because we are Division III. So there's Division I, Division II, Division III. It's weird. There's like no Division II schools. I'm sure there are some out there, but it's like everybody you come across is usually either 1 or 3. And there's just sort of a different level of intensity. There's some other kind of background rules of why schools are classified differently. Typically, smaller schools tend to be Division III, and Oxy falls into that category. We only have about 2,000 students. And so because of that, and that means about 500 of our students are varsity athletes, you're going to know athletes even if you aren't one. And there's a certain kind of less intense aspect to being a Division III athlete. The teams that Oxy plays are all located within about 100 kilometers of Oxy. So you're not traveling from state to state, flying around all over the place. You're just getting on the team bus with everybody else and hanging out. And so it's a bit of a different vibe. But the nice thing too is that this allows, it's not as big of a time commitment usually as being a D1 athlete. So students are able to pretty easily balance their academics, their athletics. They can be in other clubs. They can have friends who are not on the sports teams. So this tends to function a lot like an extracurricular in high school, rather than being like, this is the thing I do outside of class. So that's kind of a nice thing. Our students really appreciate being able to have that balance of being active, being outside in Southern California, because you can do that like year round. It's always nice outside. And at the same time, be a student, take advantage of everything that there is going on at Oxy and in Los Angeles, which I think is a really nice perk. And so, again, I think this is not the kind of place where everybody's going to like go to the big football game on Sundays and tailgate and things like that. We actually don't even have an American football team anymore. But this is a place where you're going to the sporting events because you're supporting your friends, rather than supporting the school or the team. So it's just a different kind of vibe.
Yeah. Wonderful. And Michelle.
So this picture here is actually near and dear to my heart. I'm not sure if you guys can see me at the very bottom, but this was 2020. Our women's track and field team won the indoor championship, and that was the first time that we had done it in about 10 years. So this is the team that I was on that won the championship. At Rice, we do have stellar records in terms of women's track and field. I could boast about us for a long time with many athletes that have gone to nationals and placed top 10 in the last 4 years. In addition to our women's track and field teams, our women's soccer team had a very amazing record going to the Sweet 16 last year. Our volleyball team has done great, winning conference for about 4 of the last 6 years in our conference. So right now we currently compete in Conference USA, but we will be moving to the American Conference soon. So we're moving up in the conference rankings. Some of our other teams that do well, definitely our swimming team. We actually had a Paralympian last year at the Olympics, and she won bronze. And then this year at the World Championships in swimming, she won the silver medal. So quite a lot of strength in our women's sports. We also just have a very historic men's baseball team. Our men's basketball team is doing quite well in our conference. And we also do have an American football team. So those are most of our D1 sports. It isn't the biggest culture on campus. I think women's sports, specifically volleyball and soccer, probably have some of the biggest followings on campus, but we are starting to see more of a culture around our athletic teams as we just increase our records and definitely get better. We do have a lot of, all students can come to our sporting events for free with their ID. So if you are free on a weekend, just come to one of the games. That's what we tell all of the students. And if you are not necessarily wanting to look at Rice Sports, I also wanted to share that we do subsidized tickets at Rice or free tickets to our 5 pro teams in the Houston area. And those are easy to access with the Metro, which is also a free pass for all of our Rice students.
Amazing, fun, very cool. Well, all of these like pictures and hearing you guys talk, it's like, oh, I want to go to an event. I want to go watch a sporting event soon. Well, so let's talk a little bit about, let's start kind of, because we do have a few people here definitely who say they want to be recruited as an athlete, and it is a international audience. So there's some differences probably in how a US student is recruited and how an international student is recruited. But there's this word that we've been kind of throwing out there, or acronym that we've been throwing out there, NCAA, and then Division I, Division II. So I was wondering if we could kind of like define maybe a little bit of what that is. So the first, I think, is, what does NCAA mean, and what does it mean to be NCAA eligible? Like, could anybody kind of speak to that a little bit? Any volunteers want to jump in?
Michelle, I wonder, since you yourself are a Division I athlete, or were very recently, could you talk about your experiences going through that process?
Sure. So first, to kind of clear up the acronym, NCAA stands for the National Collegiate Athletic Association. And so in this, you're going to have like multiple schools, as you can see, as we've talked about, D1 schools, D2 schools, D3 schools. And really what they're trying to do at the NCAA is they're dedicated to the success of student athletes, specifically collegiate athletes. And so in the process of becoming an NCAA eligible athlete, you do have to go through something called the clearinghouse. And pretty much what they do to check if you are eligible to be an NCAA athlete is reviewing your SAT scores, your ATC scores, and also making sure that you are an amateur student. Those are pretty much the two big things, because as an NCAA athlete, you have to be amateur, right? There are rules around being able to compete professionally. However, you have to keep that amateur status, which means that you don't get paid for playing the sport. There are a few more rules and stipulations around that, but for the most part, that's what that means to be eligible to become an NCAA athlete. Within my experience, that was truly what it was. It was going through the clearinghouse, speaking to coaches, being recruited, going on visits at various schools within the Texas and the Red River area for me, which is in the South. And yeah, other than that, that's pretty much it. If there are any more specific questions, I can answer. My NCAA experience, however, is quite little different than the actual experience of getting there.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for that definition. And I think, I think we can probably start dispelling some myths. I think sometimes when people are like, oh, are you NCAA eligible? They're thinking about certain academic qualifications that help you meet that. But there's also academic qualifications that help you, that make you admissible purely as a student. And so I think one question is, is that different? How connected are the coaches at admissions offices? Like what, do you simultaneously need to do two things at once? Or are you assuming that if a coach talked to you, that means like you're going to get into the college?
I can jump in here a little bit from the Division I perspective, and every university may be a little different. The thing with the NCAA entire process is there are a lot of rules and restrictions and times when students might be able to communicate with coaches. Coaches can communicate with students, and times when you can't. So as an admissions officer here at Syracuse, none of us are involved in the athletics recruitment process. Our Division I coaches are out there identifying students, showing interest in particular student athletes that they would like to recruit for their teams. Often they will send us transcripts to do what we call a pre-screen. So we'll take a look and give them some advice on, the student looks like they're academically admissible to a particular program or maybe not. That's not a guarantee, but that's a way that we have to kind of make sure everyone's on the same page, that they're not recruiting students who won't necessarily be academically admissible to the university. So, to get in touch with coaches can be difficult. My usual rule of thumb, and I welcome my colleagues to comment too, is that if you play a sport and have a coach that you're working with, have your coach reach out to the coaching staff at the different universities you're thinking of, because that way they can maybe have that conversation and avoid some of those blackout periods that exist when students aren't able to necessarily communicate with coaches at the university level. So just some advice from my perspective.
Yeah, and NCAA has a website, so obviously you should go there if you're actually really interested in being a student athlete. But we probably need to have another Tuesday talk with coaches, because that's like a whole nother process to, like, I saw a question about like, what's your advice on getting in touch with coaches? And that's a whole nother big conversation that we might not spend that much time on, because from the poll, there are a lot of people who want to play as a hobby. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. So, so what are the options for students who might be pretty good athletes, but they're not at the level, or they don't want to spend as much time in their 4 years of college, practicing and playing but they do want to keep up with the sport. What are your recommendations, options on how to figure out what is available and how to get involved? Like, do you have to try out for an intramural team? That kind of question. So anybody want to start us off with Jessica?
Sure, I can start there. So yes, you've heard us talk about varsity athletics a lot so far, but there's also pretty much every college is going to have club and intramural sports of varying degrees of intensity. So the varsity athletics is going to be the biggest time commitment. Club sports can also be pretty competitive, kind of depending on the sport, where you may be traveling around a bit, playing other colleges nearby, but it's not at that like Division I, Division III level. And then intramural sports tend to be quite informal. Place where I used to work previously had an intramural trivia team, which was really stretching it. But I've worked at places that had intramural Quidditch as well. And so sometimes club and intramural sports are kind of supplementing what the varsity program has. So it's not uncommon to see like rugby as a club sport because there isn't usually a varsity rugby team, but you might want to play rugby. Or ultimate frisbee is kind of a college classic as well. So these are things that you're doing really just purely for fun. Intramurals in particular, like you don't generally have to be any good. You don't really need to know the rules when you sign up. So oftentimes it's almost like getting together, putting a team together with your friends and playing against other people at your college. So much more informal. So that's kind of a spectrum of formality of how you can be involved in sports. And then pretty much all of our colleges or every college is going to have some sort of facilities for people who don't necessarily want to do an organized sport, but do want to be active. And so you may be able to use the same facilities as the varsity athletes. There might be different facilities, but generally, if you want to take a yoga class, you're going to be able to do that. If you want to just go, hit the elliptical or lift weights or something like that, there are ways to remain active just on your own as well.
So in previous talks, we've talked about the importance of, connecting with current students to kind of understand the culture at a school. If someone wanted to try to get in touch with a current student athlete or a current student who is really interested in sports, is there a good way to go about that? What is your recommendation on how can people connect to athletes at your schools?
I'll chime in here. UVA has a database of all student organizations. We call them CIOs here. And I think other schools tend to have similar databases where you can type up a club or organization that you might be interested in. You'll get a brief description and then information on contacting the group. I think that's a great place to start, especially if it is a club sport, something that you want to play at a slightly more competitive level. And you want to ask if they have tryouts, do they travel? Where do they travel? That kind of information. It takes a little extra legwork for the student to look up that information, but a lot of it is out there. If you just look up the school student organization database, you should be able to at least start there. Some club sports will also have their own websites or their own social media that you can look at, but that will depend group to group.
Mm-hmm. Great. And do you have any advice on, well, so there was, I think, a question about, Jessica already touched on this, like, you might even have Quidditch or trivia as a sport. There are these, individual sports. There's like team sports, but there are individual sports, maybe like fencing or kayaking or things like that. So are those also student organization run, or is there like, where do they go to find kind of someone to help them continue their craft?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in here. At Syracuse, we have a rec services division with all kinds of different activities like that. We have students who come in early, first year students, and they'll go whitewater rafting in that first weekend together. There's a ski club, so students can, organize trips to Lake Placid and go skiing once or twice throughout the winter. Definitely dance. We haven't really talked about dance, but we have a lot of different dance classes, a dance minor, dance teams. So a lot of different ways for students to get involved that way. So a lot of that is operated through our rec center. So our athletics facility, it's the Barn Center, we call it here. And there are lots of different things. So if team sports are not your thing, there are a lot of different ways to stay active and healthy outside of even a club or intramural sport, if you'd rather to try to do something on your own. Lots of ways. And I'm sure we all have similar options at all of our different campuses.
Great. There's also people who are interested in sports on a business level, on a level of either sports management or sports medicine or things like that. So can you speak to what might be available at your institutions, or are there ways where students could get a job, for example, being, a ball boy or, like something on campus for one of the varsity teams, but just as a job to kind of get some sports experience under their belt?
Yeah, I would love to hop in here. So first, I'd like to say at Rice, we have 3 major sports majors. So we have sports medicine as a major, sport management, and then newly, we also have sport analytics. So if you're interested in something like baseball, or you like the movie Moneyball, and you would like to pursue that as a career, we do have that for academics. And within our sport management major, there's actually lots of practicums where you can get an internship, whether it be with a sport on campus or with any of the professional sports or any other sporting events that are going on in Houston. And we are one of the best sport management majors in the United States and in Texas. So if you're interested, definitely take a look. In addition, you can become a manager. Actually, someone who works in our admission team right now, she was the manager of the women's soccer team for about 3 years. We do also have people who work as, who volunteer as practice players for the women's basketball team. So typically we have a group of men who come and play with the women's basketball team. And there are a lot of other opportunities to actually work within the athletic department, and those tend to be actually more jobs. So you'll see a lot of our internships with our marketing division, with our alumni division, with administration within athletics as well. And there's also a lot of possibilities, as I said, for being a manager. It kind of varies if the position is paid, but you can get a lot of sports experience here at Rice.
Fantastic. Did someone else want to add? I saw a couple starting to answer faces.
I would say UVA has very similar opportunities for students in terms of internships and jobs with teams, whether it's a manager or an internship related to athletic training. We do have a kinesiology major. It's a small cohort of students, but very strong. If you're interested in kind of that sports medicine, exercise science background. And then we have a new school of data science. And I was talking to one of our interns recently, and they're interested in the sports side of data analytics and plan to pursue that in the future. So there are certainly avenues, especially at a school this large.
Fun, very fun. Well, and then one last question about kind of athletics on campus, and then we're going to move into athletics in high school and how that impacts what you do in the future. But there is a question about walk-on, walk-on tryouts, if that exists. If you were not recruited and you didn't, but then you're actually really good. So what's is there that option culture, at your schools?
I'll jump in here. It does happen. I wouldn't say that it happens a lot necessarily. I've heard it particularly with our rowing teams for men and women. Sometimes we'll have students pop up after they arrive and they might join the team. So there are possibilities, but a lot of times we're asked about maybe our men's basketball team and walking onto that particular team. That's not very likely at Syracuse. Anything can happen, but I've been here a long time and I haven't really seen that yet. But there are some limited opportunities, I would say, at Syracuse.
Also wanted to join in here. So at Rice, there are quite a few opportunities, but it depends the sport. I think what we see more is through our individual sports, track, a little bit, somewhat swimming, because that is kind of borders the line, golf, and cross country, especially cross country. We definitely see a lot of students who do walk on. We have a lot on our team for sure. And then when it comes to like our sports teams, it depends. A lot of that tends to work within the actual recruitment process. So you'll see a lot of students who are like preferred walk-ons. So they sign like a very small scholarship, but it's kind of admissible, honestly. Aren't necessarily on scholarship for the team, but do get to join the team as someone who was preferred to come, but not necessarily given a scholarship. And in addition, we will have tryouts, but that's something that the coaches will just sparsely talk about, but it doesn't happen too often. It's just when it comes to walking on, it's something that you should definitely speak to the coach with. And for those who are interested, I would definitely say look at it also as a recruitment process. So you are trying your hardest to then work with the coach as they're trying to work with you as well.
Great, thank you. And just similarly to all the Tuesday talks we mentioned, I think it's a lot of engagement. You're going to have to put in the effort to go find the information, reach out. Don't just expect information to come to you. You're going to have to do a little bit of reaching out. So, well, let's transition a little bit and talk about, there are some questions here of like, do I have to compete at a national level, at high school to be, to help my application? And we're now talking about doing sports as an extracurricular activity that is going to boost my chances of getting into college. I don't want to play, I don't want to be recruited, but I want to show you something. So let's speak to that a little bit. We do have an example of what it might look like on your activities list. But before I share that, why don't we talk a little bit about let's review what holistic review is and what, when you see a sport on an application, what are the things that come to mind? So we'll start broadly. What are the things that come to mind when you see a sport on an application?
I think for me, it's not just the specific sport, but what the student has learned through the sport. It might be leadership, it might be teamwork, depending on what the activity is. Really thinking about the aspects of what you learn playing on a team or playing an individual sport rather than the actual skill itself, because most students who are applying are not recruited athletes and will be contributing to campus in many other ways, but those are all transferable skills and experiences in the classroom and in other student groups as well.
I would agree. I mean, I think discipline, again, leadership, being part of a team, integrity. I think anytime students are sharing their extracurricular involvement with us, we like to have a sense of the time commitment. So if you're on a traveling team, those kinds of things, we like to understand the context. So what kind of time contribution are you making, especially if it means you're not involved in as many things, that's okay. But give us a sense of that time commitment and what that really looks like, so we understand how you're spending your time.
I'm going to go ahead and share this example that we have and use it as kind of a pillar to kind of continue talking about this. So, there's always the question of like, how do I show you all of those things you just mentioned about leadership and discipline? Like, where do I talk about it? How do I talk about it? So, Clara, do you want to share about this example? Like, it's an A-B example, same activity, but different way to show.
Yeah, I pulled both of these examples from previous applications. It's the same activity. And just as a frame of reference, both of these students were international students. Neither one was a recruited athlete. And you'll see with the first example, you see 20 hours a week, 50 weeks a year. So obviously a very big time commitment, but it doesn't tell us much else. We don't know if it was a school team or a club team. Were they playing locally? Were they playing regionally, internationally? Did they have a leadership role at all? We're really not given much detail at all. And then the second example, you'll see it's a smaller time commitment, 5 hours a week, but almost year round, but there's more detail, the level of the tournaments, where they were playing, the academy that they played with, or the organization that they played with. I think there are still some tweaks that this student could have made. I would caution against using abbreviations unless you can tell us exactly what the abbreviation means, because we don't know all of these off the tops of our heads. But when you're doing your activities list, it's not designed to be a test. It's really something that's unique to every student, but the more information we have, the better. So be clear with your examples, be concise with your examples. And if you're asking a parent or a counselor or a teacher for feedback, ask them, is this clear? Does this capture what I've been doing over the past 3-4 years, however long it may be?
I also just want to jump in on that concise point. So this is one of the hardest things in the whole application, I think, is trying to give us this context of what you do and why it's important to you and all that, but you only have this much space. And I know it can be hard to maximize that. And I have seen some students who are trying to cram so much information into a tiny place that they make up their own abbreviations of regular words, or they are, not putting a space after a comma or something. So it all ends up just really smushed and it means nothing. So do think about how you can, in a clear and concise manner, get this information across without making it somehow even more confusing, because then that can really detract from your application, because that makes us worry, especially for international students who maybe English is not their first language. Like, do you think that this is how you can write in college? That's not going to work if you're just making up your own abbreviations as you go. So that is one thing that I would caution against. So there's, I think the example A here is the opposite end of that. If there were an example C, I would say the kind of bad version is the trying to put too much information into the point where it doesn't even make sense anymore.
I would recommend a few things here. Depending on if there are any honors, definitely try to put that in the honors section of the application, so that we're able to see that, and then any general information underneath the extracurriculars. And for us, if you do have additional information that you would like to add that you feel is very important, please add that in your additional information section of the application. So we do want to try to get, like at Rice, we do want to try to get as much information as possible. And if there are things that you want to share, there is additional space to do that. But as Jessica stated, please be concise within your actual extracurricular space, like underneath B. Be concise with what you have to say, but if there is more, add it somewhere else. If you do have major honors, that's what the honors section is for.
Wonderful. Great. You answered, Michelle, my question of like, when is it on the activities list and when is it on the awards and honors list? And I think, and when you see it in both places, it does kind of help you bring the story together, like that athletics is really important to this student. There is a specific question, somebody who wants to apply to very selective schools, they are not at a national or international level of competition. And they just want to know, is it necessary to put a sport down, to be competitive? The answer, I see lots of shaking of heads, but
there are lots of misconceptions about the activities list. Some people see it as a checklist where they need to have something athletics related, something arts related, something pre-professional, and we're not looking at it like that. If we're getting 50,000 applications, it's going to be 50,000 activity lists that look completely different. So prioritize the things that most interest you and that you want to pursue. We're not going to penalize you for not playing a sport.
Yeah, I always say we don't really care what you do, we care that you do. Because this is our way of predicting what you're going to be like in our community. We get a sense of your level of engagement where you are right now, and that is the best predictor that you're going to be involved once you get here. And so that's why, yeah, there's no sort of secret magic, like you play a sport, you play the oboe, you volunteer, like you're the president of the French club. Like if everybody had the same set of activities, it'd be a very boring place and there'd be a power struggle in the French club. So I think that there's not this magic secret like formula or anything like that. And, you know, if you've done a lot of things in high school that you're at the point where you have more than 10 activities that you could potentially list, definitely prioritize those. If you, haven't played a sport since 9th grade and you're sort of like, I mean, maybe I would do the intramural level for fun with my friends. You don't really need to put that if it's not as important to you as some of the other things. What we really want to get a sense of is what you're like as a person, so that we can get a sense of whether you will find your place and thrive in our community. And the extracurricular list helps us with that a lot.
I would love to jump in and just add that we all kind of understand that your access to extracurricular activities might be more limited, particularly during the pandemic. You know, there were things that we all wanted to do that all of a sudden we didn't have access to. So sometimes I think international students worry. They hear about extracurriculars, they hear that we're looking for well-rounded students, and they think, oh, I have to have all of these things. Your school might not offer it. You might be doing an exam-based curriculum where there's just not time, or you're a dual curriculum student, you're in school very late, and maybe you've had very limited things that you've been able to do. So I agree with my counterparts here. We don't have an expectation of you have to be a president of something, you have to play a sport, you have to have started something. That's just not reality. We like to know what you've been able to do because it tells us sort of what your priorities are. I always put in a plug as well. You know, sometimes students are caregivers. They have grandparents who live in the home, or they have other siblings or other responsibilities. They might work. Those things are important for us to know too. So if that's been part of your, you know, outside of school involvement, feel free to share that as well, because it tells us more about who you are, your experiences, and how you've been spending your time. So just a couple of things I always like to work into that extracurricular conversation.
Fantastic.
Just do one quick aside related to the pandemic, is also that we as international admission people understand that while the United States has pretty much decided the pandemic is over and we're not really doing anything about that anymore, we know that other parts of the world are not in that situation, that some places are still subject to pretty severe lockdowns, that can still be limiting your extracurricular engagement and just your ability to see your friends. It's still affecting your mental health, your physical health. We get that it's different all over the world, even if some of our more, what we're, you know, where we're living is kind of over it.
Yeah, great. Wonderful. Well, I do want to kind of address one more kind of myth. There are, you know, in some places they call them the 24K gold activities. So there are currently, like, there are some counselors or independent people or agents who are saying that it's important for you to do a certain activity. A certain activity will give you plus points for the application. I'm not sure this is plus points right there, but so that to say, you know, what like people are asking, like, I heard that if you're a fencer that you just have a leg up, or I heard that golf is one of those sports that you know, very few people are playing, and so if you're really good, it's a leg up. So what would you say to that?
There's no perfect mixture of extracurriculars. There isn't anything that's going to give you that, all right, this person is in, because as all of my counterparts have said, the application is not about, all right, what's perfect. It's about a mixture of the student and who you are. We want your application to reflect who you are, because then we'll know, okay, this student might get involved, or right, in running because that's all they did whenever, that's a lot of what they did. Or, they were heavily a part of the chess club and the trivia club, and that's what they want to join and bring that to Rice or Occidental or Syracuse or UVA. It's all about looking at you as a whole. That's that holistic review and all the parts you bring in and everything that happened to you in your life, not just one particular extracurricular.
Yeah.
Also, just a quick thing. I keep in mind that we're reading lots of applications, not just yours. And sometimes we start to see kind of weird trends coming out of a given place. Where it's like, why is everybody fencing now?
Yeah.
So we start to see those things to the point where it's like, well, if everybody's fencing, somebody's telling you to do this because you think this is going to be a leg up. And then again, like it can be totally well-intentioned, but if that is the backstory of how you got into fencing, then that can actually kind of end up working against you because it's like, well, is this real or did you just write this down?
Yep. Well, we have 9 minutes. So if you have a question that you didn't ask, make sure you start asking them. I wanted to try to continue talking about this, like, and Michelle, maybe you could speak to this since you were an athlete. Like, how does one know, like what Jessica's saying, how to prioritize those activities? Like, how do you know? I mean, obviously there's a time commitment. If you spent much of your day doing something, it's probably important to you. But what are some of the other kind of signs that to you that, oh, this is actually important to me? Like, oh, this is something I really should highlight. Is it something like, at Initial B, we say like, look, if you're waking up thinking about it and going to bed thinking about it, you should probably talk about it in your interview. So what are some kind of like signs or words of advice on how to help students instead of listening to somebody else saying you should do fencing? How do you know, like, what should be your number one activity on your list?
Oh, that's a really good question. So definitely I would say something that you spend the most time on, but a caveat to that is also something that you love the most. One thing that I think a lot of us as admission counselors can tell is when you're very genuine about what the things are that you love. And I think another sign that you should prioritize it, if it's something that you see yourself doing long term, right? If you get that gut feeling of this is something that I enjoy, because we love to see that what you're doing in your free time correlates to what you want to do, whether that be something you want to do as your major or something that you want to do in terms of like an extracurricular at the university and how those things come together. It's all about, again, like the passion, right? I knew that I could wake up at 6 a.m. and go lift for track practice. And so I was like, yeah, that's definitely something that I want to do. But I also knew that, right, like reading articles about psychology was definitely like something that I would do every single day for whatever reason, right? It's finding that passion and being able to put it on your application into words as something that reflects on to you as a person.
Great. Well, we have a question here about specifically like international student groups on campus. And, a lot of people at the high school level are starting like little leagues of their own, or, and they're wondering, is there help if an international group of students wants to start their own little basketball league or their own little intramural team? What kind of support is there for that? And how do you kind of go about, who do you ask?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in here. Students create new organizations all the time at Syracuse, and I suspect at all of our campuses. The most immediate example that came to my mind is some of our South Asian students started a cricket team a few years ago. So they play on the quad, and other people join in, and it's really cool. And it's something that they love and wanted to bring to the community that we have here. So typically there's a process. You fill out some forms. You need a faculty or staff advisor to your organization, and it really is that simple. So that's something I suspect on all of our campuses students would be supported in doing.
Great. And there's another question here about being seen as an athlete. And in the international sphere, it's a little harder because coaches are not traveling all over the world usually. They're mostly traveling around the US. Occasionally they'll go. But how can you be seen if you feel like, yeah, no, I'm a really good athlete and I would like coaches to see me? What are ways that people, I mean, obviously there are summer options where people could come to the US in the summer, but are there other ways that athletes can kind of show their skills?
Reach out to the coach. It is a little bit more simple than we think. I definitely think sending an email to the coach. A lot of websites do have a place where you can send a perspective, like you can send your criteria, your stats to the coaches. It's like a prospective student athlete link within the various athletics pages, or you could also directly email that coach. I've noticed an influx of students DMing coaches through Instagram, a little bit less professional, but also a way to just get your name out there. And as that, conversation ensues, definitely like sending some video of yourself as well. That's a very important part, just so they can see you, because not many coaches are going to have the opportunity to come watch internationally, as you guys may know and may have dealt with.
Wonderful. Well, as usual, the hour goes by so quickly. And so we're nearing the end. And so as we end, do you all have kind of some closing thoughts, closing words of advice for students and parents and counselors who are in the process right now? Specifically, we had more than half, I think, of the audience here. They're just like starting their applications right now. They may have already started filling the things out or even submitting things. Any last words of advice? In addition to these that we wrote down here, but or maybe just like a summary of.
Yeah, I think we all are sort of working with the theme here of doing things that you love and not to try to appeal to an admissions officer. Anyone who tries to tell you they have the magic combination of extracurriculars, you shouldn't listen to them, because that's not a thing that exists. If it did, someone would write that book and would be retired on those profits by now. But we're building community here, so we want to have really interesting mix of people, mix of interests, things that make you happy and drive you. And this is one way to demonstrate that in the application process. So if that helps at all, I hope it does. But be yourself and do the things that really make you happy in the process.
Any other words of advice, closing words? I cannot stress over and over again how important it is for you all to reach out. I know I'm glad that you all come to Tuesday Talks on a regular basis and you're trying to learn a lot, but it is a big part of the process is reaching out and engaging, because these admissions officers, they'll be able to point you in the right direction. Websites are big, have lots of information, and you can do a little bit of that research on your own, but sometimes just asking a very direct question like, I can't find the athletics page. like, can you help me? There are people on the other side that really want to help you. So if we didn't answer your questions today, or you're like, I really want to know more about such and such, please go ahead and email these colleagues. Email me. I'm always available to help kind of direct people to the right place as well. And especially if you're like, I already got a comment in here, like, let's do another one of these with coaches. So I will put that in the back of my mind and see if I can get some coaches to come on Tuesday Talks at some point. But in the meantime, we just want to wish you well. We know this process is super stressful, and there are a lot of voices telling you what to do here. But really, reflect and think about what you love, and don't get caught up in what everybody else around you is doing, and reach out. So, any other final thoughts before we say goodbye? Thank you so much, Jessica and Michelle and Clara and Lisa, for joining us for Tuesday Talks. It's been such a pleasure having you here. Everybody else, we are going to have Tuesday Talks again next week. We will be talking to UC Davis and UC Santa Cruz about test free and how UCs evaluate you. So I'm sure a lot of people are excited about that, as that application deadline is earlier than some other deadlines. So thank you, everybody, and have a great night, afternoon, morning, get some rest, Jessica and Michelle, especially thank you for waking up early for this call. All right.